Okay, here I'm demonstrating the relationship between energy and mass. What I have here is basically just the computer webcam facing the television, mirror-to-mirror reflection. You see here I've got the Einstein equation written on the first frame. Energy equals, okay, you notice the equals falls on the, you see this divider line here. Basically we're drawing a difference between what we consider dark matter with matter that's visible, or we could just, the choice of a better expression, light matter, visible matter, mass. So on the dark side we could represent this as dark energy. The energy that we know is there because of how it interacts with mass objects. So here we have the E side. Of course you can see the E, but in the reality of in the physics standpoint, this is invisible. This is the dark matter, dark energy that's profuse. A great percentage of the physical universe is comprised of this dark energy. Not dark as in black, but dark just not visualized by the human eyes. However, mentally and intellectually, it's implicated as being there, and we can infer correctly that it is there, although we can't see it. But there's a relationship between what we can't see and can see, and I'm demonstrating this here, and I'm introducing a fresh physics, what I would consider a discovery, demonstrating the relationship between energy and mass. And what you're seeing here demonstrated, when applied as to methodology and principles, geometric, spatial, proportional, there's going to be hundreds if not thousands of constants discovered, and may just represent a reconciliation between what we can see and can't see, reconciliation of the four forces, i.e. unified theory. So here we see energy on the dark side, but energy, so long as it's not relative to a reflective substance, remains dark energy. But once that energy side comes into relativity with some kind of reflective medium, plane, vector, stratum, whenever energy comes into relativity with the surface plane of reflection, the incidence angle of the light ray, which we cannot see, the invisible energy that's projected in the forward motion, the light ray that's going forward in a forward motion, so long as it does not collide with or come into relativity with a mirrored substance, fluid, ether, or a solid substance, we don't know yet, but so long as it's not relative to these reflective points in space, we cannot see it. Actually, interestingly enough, our eye basically is principally defined through the principles of reflection. But anyway, refraction of light photon, communicating or producing an image, and then subsequently interpreted by the brain. But anyway, E side is energy. The mc squared, and I'm going to say mc squared as it's written in the Einstein. However, we're going to modestly try, if this can be expressed and people understand it, demonstrate that there is a flaw in this theory. Energy equals mc squared. That is, the right side of the equation, mc squared, is only, solely, exclusively produced. Objects appear, objects are maintained, objects go through a period of time, a beginning, an end. All of that happens on the right side is exclusively contingent upon the relativity of a mirrored plane. We'll just refer to it as a plane right now, relative to invisible energy, invisible light. So if all these frames were gone, then there would be no joule or representations of energy at that point in space and time. So energy equals mc squared. In essence, they have a particle theory, they have a wave theory. And as a result of the two-slit experiment, it's rather obscured the distinguishing between the two of whether or not light is a particle or a wave. Just if you can imagine this as light, the mc squared side is visible light. The E side is the dark energy that we cannot see. So I would postulate that if there's a phenomenon referred to as the particle theory or wave theory, wave phenomenon, that the particle would exist on the dark side, the side that we cannot see, and once it's communicated or reflected to a plane, then a wave phenomenon is produced as an expression of or as a simulation of the E side, which is a particle, light photon. We'll get into the quantum part of this later on. Okay. If you imagine that this right here represents, illustratively, this whole scenario that you see here represents a rock being thrown into a body of water, the surface of the water. When the rock, we refer to the rock as the energy, or the light ray, or the light photon, the E side. When the rock, or energy, comes in contact with the white part here, that is or we could even go as far as, and I'll explain this later, this white part actually representing gray matter. But whenever this rock contacts the white, the surface of the water, okay, then it immediately produces a ripple effect, or a wave phenomenon. No wave phenomenon, or no ripple effect, or no mass would emerge without the two elements here, the energy side and the medium side, the reflective medium. And this part, the reflective medium, is not represented in the equation where it should be. And we'll demonstrate, though, how it is kind of suggested right here with the squaring, and even further with the c squared. But for right now, imagine that the E energy rock has collided with the surface of a body of water. The first wave, now of course we're viewing this as if we're on the outside and the rock is being thrown in down here. Okay? And we're on the outside looking. So the waves are gradually getting smaller. By the time they get to us, they've expanded. But let's just reverse our intellectually or mentally reverse process and view it as if we're out here, and this is the first wave. This first one here is the first wave. And of course the smaller one down there is really the big one. And of course from a physics perspective, from purely observational, if I travel down this tube, the farther I travel this way and look back, the more this is going to seem to contract. Okay, if I'm traveling this way, this would expand relative to my view, and what I just came from would contract. So either way, it makes no difference. We're just discussing the wave phenomenon here. So imagine that the E has contacted the river, or the water surface. This white area that says mc squared would represent the first ripple, would represent the crest of the wave, the first wave emanating out from where the rock came into initial contact. We refer to that as the singularity. Where the rock contacts the surface of the water represents the singularity. And of course the rock goes down into the depth, the thickness of the water, and we'll get into that too. And that can be viewed in the reverse as well. Okay, so imagine that this white here is the first, you see all the frame, the first frame, and I don't know how this is registered on the webcam here, the first frame where you actually can see the color to my hand represents the first wave. Okay, it crests And then before it crests here, there is a space where it drops down, and there's a certain space. And of course, this expresses the golden ratio. It expresses the inverse square law, and so on and so forth. So this would represent the first crest of the wave. Then it would valley, then another crest, then a valley, then another crest. So in actuality, only, in an illustrative standpoint, only the crest represents the mass representation of the energy. But when that first wave appears, a mirror reflection of the energy here, when it appears, it undergoes another transformation to energy, or an associative accompanying spatial energy that maintains this whole flow here. Okay, so we have a crest, then the energy, which is associated, which is still continuing to maintain the original mass object that appears. It continues to be maintained through a series of waves. Wave, maintenance, energy given, continuing to live. Energy given, continue to thrive. And of course, this creates the concept of time, space, mass, relativity, and all that. So if you can just imagine that this is a wave, and actually if you sit here, we'll basically simulate a wave. That is up, mass, energy sustained, mass, energy sustained. It's a constant alternating current of energy being fed to a mass object, the mass object exhausting that energy, then energy being afforded to the object again. The mass object assimilating that, utilizing it. It starts to cessate, energy being. So this is a constant current or eddy, okay, which originates here. Basically, so long as energy is here, this process will continue, and the mass object that is a representation or a dual version or a form of the energy that it's reflecting is maintained relative to this mirror-to-mirror reflection, as producing basically a fractaling from the surface. That is, the energy, first of all, hits the surface of the plane, okay, the surface geometry of the plane. Whatever this mass object is appearing on the surface, it will produce a geometry. And that geometry will continue to be propagated, and form the whole three-dimensional. So we can imagine the first frame here as the representation of energy when it first hit the surface area of a reflective medium or aether. Whenever it hits the surface medium, there is a one-dimensional geometric expression of this energy found here. But as it continues to reflect, then it produces fractals. It continues to, basically, if one of the appropriate definitions of supersymmetry as opposed to symmetry is the fact, really, there's only one word that separates symmetry from supersymmetry, and that is supersymmetry is a continual symmetry. So imagine this is the first is a symmetric copy on the surface of the quality and attribute and energy emanating from E side, the dark energy side that we cannot see until it's first communicated to this reflective plane. Whenever that happens, then every corresponding frame actually represent the geometry here being simulated, being propagated, copied, and of course reproduced. And of course the surface, so long as energy is relative to this plane, not only will the surface geometry remain intact, but the thickness, the area encompassed by any particular mass object, the space or the invisible energy or space within a mass object, as defined as an outer limit or demarcation encapsulating a certain volume of space as separating that particular object as opposed to another mass object in its vicinity or another form of energy. So the surface geometry is communicated, and then subsequently through this mirror-to-mirror reflection, actually the surface geometry grows and expands and actually becomes a three-dimensional mass object. And of course we could actually equate or possibly synonymize the reflection happens here, and then all of these other ones here represent the refraction of light. Light contacts the plane, the surface, creates a one-dimensional volume of information, or one-dimensional geometric thing, which is defined as information planted on a screen. That information doesn't stop there. That information continues to travel through the medium. And of course, just like if we can imagine a mirror, you have the surface, then you have the back, and then of course the light incidence angle comes in, reflects through the glass, refracts, hits the reflective part, and bounces back. This is in essence what happens to form a mass object. So however big the object is, now there's not too many objects out there. There's systems out there that are bigger than what it would take for light to travel from one to the other side. But if an object is small, then however long it takes the light wave to hit the surface, refract, hit the reflective point, and comes out, that's how quickly, basically instantaneously, when E comes in contact with these reflective planes, when energy comes in, the object immediately emerges. It's not a process. It's an immediate emergence, something brought from nothing, relative to an observer who's looking at an area of space, sees nothing, and all of a sudden an object appears. And that object is appearing because the point and place that we're looking at it, even though we may or may not understand or acknowledge or be aware that it is a mirrored surface, when energy of light is transferred to that surface and lights that surface up, then the instantaneous reflection or dual copy of E emerges, and we observe that. And of course, with this comes all the necessary ingredients and qualities and attributes and processes necessary to bring motion about as well. But we'll get to that. And we'll also get to the relationship of how we can discern if a particular mass object is so big, we can actually determine by the diameter of that mass object, not the weight, not the volume, not the mass, but the diameter, the distantial measurement across. Let's just, for instance, let's refer on the surface to a circle. If all this is concluded into a sphere, the diameter, we can actually determine by the length across the diameter how far the energy that's reflecting that spherical object is away. Maybe a little bit more difficult to find the direction that it's going to be in, but we'll get into all that length dilation, length contraction, all those things when we'll start to demonstrate that even though we may see a sphere, or observe a sphere or a circle, relative observation, if we're observing that circle straight on, it'll appear a circle. But if we're observing it from different angles, then that circle will appear to stretch. Okay? And that would define the relationship between this light ray as attached or bonded to the surface, producing a relativity between the mass representation of E and the energy side, that how this light ray is shining and the angle of the mirrored plane as registering or copying the energy into a mass form. The angle of the mirrored plane relative to the angle that the ray could come in this way, this way, this way. Those two elements, where the light progression is coming relative to the angle away from true parallelism, and that right there is what creates these strange things that we're seeing with relativity. That one person can view it as a sphere, the other person may view it as a ellipsis, a stretched sphere. And actually, you take a sphere, and if it's turned, and if you're relatively viewing it in an extreme angle away from parallelism, that sphere can actually become a straight line. In essence, we'll get to that. But the relationship of E to mc squared here is demonstrated. And I'm just going to say, and then I'll demonstrate it in the next video, what you're seeing here isn't just some interesting or non-interesting. That's a matter of perspective. It certainly provokes a thought, but we're really going to provoke and really start drawing out some geometric, mathematical, and scientific and physics principles out of this, that basically we're going to demonstrate that if we apply what's going on here and understand it and fully record the information and pick up the principles and discover really what this phenomenon is and how it's occurring, that it really can lead to unification. It really can lead to a unified theory. Not can as a matter of interpretation, mathematically and scientifically, this will birth a reconciliation between all the forces that we, and beyond just the four forces, every action or reaction or everything that we see that occurs, every event, every recording of time, every span of time, expansion, contraction, all this is explained if we come to understand that energy is not equivalent to mass, and mass is not equivalent to energy. Rather, energy, if there's a mass that emerges or that is existent at any point in the universe, then that would the constant would be that energy is relative to that mass object and actually maintaining that mass object. Then in other words, E equals mc squared, although it talks a lot about relativity, the way it's stated here, it kind of appears to say that so long as we have these qualities here on the mass side, then we can equal energy. And I don't agree with that. I believe that E equals mc squared, fully understood, and I'll express it and broaden this equation out to show that really E equals mc squared is really merely expressing the relativity or the relationship between dark energy and visible mass objects which possess energy, utilize energy, but they're two different forms, and one is dependent on the other, where the other is independent, and has no dependency on the existence of mass. The reverse isn't true. In order for this side of the equation to occur, it has to be relative to the reflection of energy and light. So this equation here has failed to really fully describe the relationship and has stretched people's predisposition into coming up with a conclusion, trying to prove their conclusion that energy is the very equivalent of mass, or mass is the, and that's not true. In other words, this is the bulk side. Anything that appears here, big, here, smaller, 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 to an insect up to an elephant, from the earth to the earth, if the earth was reflected to this frame, to what would appear like a huge galaxy. The relationship is that all mass objects are reflections of energy. And each individual white frame here represents plane energy, plane representations. The bulk exists here. And if the bulk is a fluid state, infinite fluid state, same at all points, then at no time can these individual reflections of points of the fluid state represent the whole fluid state. So mass, no matter how you combine if you combine all the masses together, it would not create any equivalency to the true nature and reality of that energy that's invisible that produces mc squared is infinite. These are static. These are finite expressions of the infinicy of the bulk energy space, which is everywhere and infinite. So the next video I will demonstrate, if you see this line here, I've drawn that for a reason. And down here I've drawn another line for a reason. What we're going to do, of course it's going to be a little bit difficult given the sensitivity of this, as you can see this moving, and if I move the computer you can see it move, but I'm going to attempt to make measurements between this black line and this black line on one crest or one wave. Then I'm going to go to this line, measure it, and then this line and measure it, and we're going to do some math, and we're going to come to the realization that indeed the mirror-to-mirror phenomenon, the mirror-to-mirror reflection, as producing supersymmetries, as producing the whole volume, refracted volume of space that's originates on the surface of a plane, that how it produces the sum of the golden ratio. This line measured divided by this line divided by this line. We'll get to that in a later video.